Well, this is a UK-EU negotiation for a treaty. There are aspects around that which relate to the relationship between Gibraltar and Spain and the United Kingdom, Gibraltar and Spain. So, we need to ensure that we understand that there will be things that cannot now continue. Indeed, there will be aspects of the European negotiation which might not be able to be taken to a conclusion because Spain will need to, as a member state, be involved in the approval of certain aspects of that. Will be consulted very directly on that, and they will need ministerial steers on that issue. So it's very important that we do understand the actual context in which we find ourselves, and we understand why it is that we are here. Pedro Sanchez has done something which I think is worthy of everyone's respect. He's called a general election because he says he's heard the voice of his people, and the time has come for him to call that general election now, in his view. We must respect the outcome of that general election. We must, of course, consider that people going to vote is what is appropriate in a democracy, and Gibraltar is going to respect the outcome of that general election in Spain. Of course, whatever the outcome may be, whether we are ideologically closer to it on the left or not. I mean, those are the issues. Why haven't we got a treaty yet? I think that might be the question that many are asking. I've heard some references which I think need to be answered. Some people are saying, the government has failed to do a treaty in time. Look, if there was an option on the table which enabled us to do a safe and secure treaty that was good for Gibraltar, we would have done that treaty already. If we have not brought back a treaty, it's because it has not been possible to negotiate a treaty that is safe and secure for Gibraltar, a good treaty for Gibraltar. And I've always maintained that no treaty is better than a bad treaty. And that's the position that has ensured that we haven't brought back a treaty yet.
So, Chief Minister, any potential treaty would require the Spanish government to approve it. So is it now therefore not possible to achieve a treaty until the results of the Spanish elections are known and there is a new government in Spain?
So there's a lot of law in the question that you're asking, and the answer is not straightforward. If you have a mixed agreement in the EU, then it requires the approval of each of the members of the European Council, that is to say, the 27 remaining member states of the European Union. If you don't have a mixed agreement, then it only requires the approval of the EU institutions, the Council, the Commission, and the European Parliament. That is the legal position. Now, let's go now to the real politique. Let's go to the political reality with which we are dealing, whatever it is what we might like to be dealing with. What is the actual political reality that we are dealing with? And the actual political reality that we are dealing with is that the European Commission will not agree a treaty with the United Kingdom in relation to Gibraltar if that treaty does not pass muster with the Spanish government of the day when that treaty is going to be finalized. Whether we like it or not, whether we think it's fair or unfair, whether it suits our view of history and the future, that is the reality. And therefore, if the Spanish government is not able to give its approval or consent to a text of a treaty, to have that treaty approved, then it's not going to be approved this side of a Spanish general election. That's not to say that we can't continue the work that we were doing. That's not to say that we can't continue to explore certain elements of what it is that we are hoping to finalize. But final agreement is now very unlikely to come before the results of the Spanish general election on the 23rd of July. That's just a political and legal reality for the reasons I've explained.
And although the election result yesterday on Sunday would not necessarily have yielded a PP Vox government because of the differences between the local and regional elections and the Spanish national elections, it still is enough to have prompted Pedro Sanchez to call a snap election. It still gives the impetus to the right, to the Partido Popular and to the Vox, who would be, certainly when it comes to Vox, far more hostile towards a future relationship with Gibraltar. Are you worried now that the Spanish election results are basically an existential threat to the work that you've been doing for the past few years towards our future relationship with Spain and the rest of the EU?
Jonathan, you as a taxpayer and a voter, and everyone who's watching or listening, do not pay me to worry. You pay me to ensure that I hold our nerve whilst many around us might be losing it. So we're going to continue working. We're going to ensure seeing all of the pitfalls, not feeling worried, but ensure that the work that we're doing is going to reach the conclusion that we want to reach, or otherwise achieve the objectives that we want to reach, whether that's by the route of a treaty, which is what we've, as you say, rightly been working on for so many years now, whether it's by another route, that we achieve the safety and security that Gibraltar requires economically, socially, and politically. Now, I still believe that that is going to be achieved through the route of a treaty between the United Kingdom and the European Union. I don't accept much of what you said in the pretext of your question is the political situation in Spain, or why Pedro Sanchez may have called a general election. But I'm not here to theorize politically. But turkeys don't vote for Christmas. Pedro Sanchez is well known to be a master tactician in the context of Spanish politics. And he obviously sees a route back into the Moncloa by calling the general election now. There's a lot of writing in El País in the past couple of days, which, as people would expect, I read assiduously now, because it's my obligation to read El País as much as it's my obligation to read the Chronicle and the Financial Times and the Times every day, to ensure that we're on top of all of these issues. And there are very good arguments to suggest that, in fact, the vote that you've seen in the Spanish regional election is unlikely to see the result that you're going to see coming out of a general election. There's very likely to be a higher participation in a general election. There's very likely to be a different offer to the Spanish public in a general election, because different parties. And look at the example, for example, of La Linea. Juan Franco, who has swept the board, and I congratulated him for it. He's a good friend of Gibraltar. He swept the board in La Linea with 22 out of 25. Doesn't stand in a general election. So votes will be spread differently in areas, regions, municipalities, where there are some regional options, most of them of the left, which might create different alternative outcomes. And in just one area, in Huesca, for example, there are 4 parties of the left apart from PSOE, 4 parties of the left apart from PSOE. Okay. Each of them have garnered between 4.6 and 5% of the vote, but not got over the 5%. By not getting over the 5% in the Spanish system, they don't get representation. If those 4 left-wing parties get together, they draw nearly 19% of the vote, which of course means that they would get serious representation, and with PSOE's vote, they would have the majority in that parliament. So as your viewers may know, there is an issue now about Izquierda Unida, Podemos, and Sumar forming a coalition and not going alone into the general election, so that you would have PSOE and the Sumar, Podemos, Izquierda Unida coalition on the left. That would fracture the vote on the left a lot less. That would mean more seats in the Spanish parliament than would have resulted if you did a direct extrapolation of the regional results. And the clear thinking in Spain is that you cannot extrapolate the regional municipal election results into a general election. You can see a trend, of course, but you cannot say, as you have said, that it's very likely that there's going to be a Partido Popular Vox government. I think there is everything to play for, and I would say that to you also as an ideologically closer leader of a political party to Pedro Sanchez.
No, I didn't quite say that, but I mean, I think that the rest of your answer stands. So we'll let the listeners and viewers make their own minds up. But in respect of this latest developments in the Spanish national politics, where were we before that with the treaty? Because we've heard Keith Asopardi point out that we're still agreeing principles, but that the drafting of the actual treaty text would, in any case, after the principles are agreed, which he understands, we understand, haven't yet been. If they haven't yet been agreed, and there are still months of drafting of the actual treaty text ahead of us, we're quite a long way away from a treaty, and this is 1 year after you said we're within touching distance of it.
Well, look, Keith Asopardi hasn't pointed anything out. Keith Asopardi has repeated to me in Parliament the things that I've said before outside of Parliament. And in answer to a question, I explained to him where we were in terms of principles and in terms of treaty text. Now, of course, as I also said in Parliament, there can be a lot of devil in the detail, or because there's a lot of pro forma drafting that will be involved here, there can be less devil in the detail. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Jonathan, I'm not going to do this quickly. I'm going to do this properly. I'm going to do a treaty which is a good treaty for Gibraltar. If the people of Gibraltar think that we should have negotiated this treaty quickly, regardless of the content, regardless of whether that meant that we brought back home a treaty that was better or worse, good or bad, and whether or not it contained not sovereignty in its pure form, but ingredients of sovereignty, which were given away by Gibraltar because we were doing it quickly, then they've got the wrong chief minister. Because I'm never going to give away even an element or ingredient of Gibraltar sovereignty.
You've made
I'm
that
not going
clear,
to do it
Chief Minister.
quickly, as Keith Asobali has suggested I should have done. Because, look, there is a deal on the table, and there has been a deal on the table for some time,
Yes, but
which is not a good deal for Gibraltar.
fair enough.
And I will not do it.
But Chief
Now,
Minister, you are the one
does
who
that
said
mean that we still have a
over.
road to go down? We still have a road to go down. We have been very close. We are almost there. Different elements then come in and drive us apart. The prospect of a deal is there in a moment, and then thereafter, new elements come in. I think it's not prudent to talk about those elements at any time until a deal is done, but you have to keep going. There is no alternative. And I
So,
put it to you, Jonathan, that if any other Gibraltarian who believes, as I do, and as my party and our liberal coalition partners believe, that the sovereignty of Gibraltar is sacrosanct, were sitting at the table, and alongside me, they will be making the same decisions about how to do this treaty or not do it.
okay, Chief Minister, you've had contact with the Spanish government at the highest levels. Have you spoken to Pedro Sanchez since Sunday, or his office?
Look, I've been very circumspect and discreet about the contacts that I have with the Spanish government, because I don't think it's in the interest of the people of Gibraltar that I give away what that level of contact is. The important thing about those contacts is that we should maintain them, that they should be deployed in the best interest of Gibraltar and its people always, and not that we should be trumpeting from the airways what contacts I've had or have not had.
Okay, and finally, Chief Minister, you recently told my colleague Rosa Stengo that you knew the date of the general election a while back. Does this have any impact, any bearing, the developments in Spanish politics, the potential impact on a treaty, does it have any bearing on when you might call a general election?
You're the second person to ask me that within a few hours. And I'm sorry to disappoint the haters. I'm sorry to disappoint those who want to change the government of Gibraltar. But I've been now very clear for the past 2 years on what the date of the general election in Gibraltar is going to be. One particular event might have derailed it, but that event, thank God, didn't come to pass. And so the general election is going to be called on the day that I expected to call it. And I expect that the people of Gibraltar, when the time comes, will want to recognize the extremely hard work that has been done by the team that I lead in the most difficult circumstances in the past 4 years, facing challenges that nobody could have imagined in October 2019 we would be facing. And they'll be doing that on the date that I set my eye on as the right date about 2 years ago.
Okay, Chief Minister, we're almost out of time, but maybe I can ask you two quick fire questions. You're in London today. Is that for treaty talks with the UK government?
In part.
And secondly, people, I think, have generally been feeling, anxious about the uncertainty about the treaty generally, but even more so following the election results in Spain and now the prospect of a Spanish national election. What would you say to them in short? Is a treaty now less likely? Do we have to think more about the real possibility of a no negotiated outcome?
Well, I would say it's not time for that sort of speculation. I would say that it's important that we keep calm and carry on. People should hold their nerve. And if there's anybody who feels they can't hold their nerve, I'll hold it for them.